Today, we will learn how to implement Request.JS in our Rails applications. Rails Request.JS encapsulates the logic to send by default some headers that are required by Rails applications. So we'll use this to make requests such as our get, put, patch, and even our destroy request. To begin, we'll first create our blank Rails application, and I'll simply generate a scaffold. We'll just use article, and we'll say content and title. And then we can run Rails DB migrate. Now that we have done that, we can look at Request.js. And if we look at the documentation, it simply says that we should add the gem to our gem file, which I'm copying. And we head over to our gem file. And we run bundle. And once we have done that, we can run Rails Request.js install. And there we go. So let's update our routes. We can simply pass this here. We can change the route to be articles index, and then we can start up our Rails server. So once we have done that, we can go to localhost 3000, and we could simply create some random information. You can say first content, and if you do the same, second, and we could say second content, and third content. So now that we have done that, we can head over to our hello controller, and the first thing that we want to do is we can rename this to, let's just change it to request controller. Our request controller. And next, if we go ahead and look at the documentation once more, which is here, you can see we can import fetch request from Rails /request.js, or we could use the shorthand methods and specify each request that we want to use. So we could use get, post, put, patch, and destroy. So we simply just copy this and we import it. We do not need this anymore. We don't need that there. So to begin, we will define a method that we'll use to get our data from our index. So if we go to our articles.json, since we're using JSON builder, you can see we get the JSON data back from all the information that we have created, the first, the second, and the third. So we could define a method. We could say async, and let's say get index data. And now that we're doing that, we can specify the response, and we'll use a wait for it. And then we could go ahead and get window.location.href, and this will return the current URL that we're visiting. So since we were here and we want to get the JSON file, the JSON data rather, we could simply add it using plus .json. And now that we have done that, you can say if response is okay, we can simply set a variable to be body, and we want to parse the JSON. And we can say response text, all right? And since we have that, we can simply do console.log body. So if we come back here and we open up our console, you can see nothing happens here, and that is because if you go to our index page, we did not wrap this in a data controller. So we'll say data controller and we call it request, and then you close this up. So if you come back here and we refresh, you can go back here and we can simply call our method, because we forgot to do that, and the initialize and we can say get index data. So when this controller is first initialized, we want this method to run. So we run it, and there we go. We can see the data we have here is an array of object ID. We have the ID, we have the title, we have the first content, and we have the second content and the third. We could do a similar thing for our show page. So if we go to show, we could simply just wrap this in the data controller, and we'll say request, and we close that up. So if you go to show, you can see returns the object of the first element. So we have first content. If you go to second, see we have it here. So that is one way we can use that. We could also, if you go to our article.html.erb, since this file is shared between the index and the show, we could simply put a button and let's say show data, all right? And with that, you can do data action, and we can specify request, or rather request, and what was the name of our method again? Get index data. And we can save it. So if we come back here and we comment this out, because we don't want it to run it, we only want it to run when we click on it. So if we click on show data, you can see it shows the data that we wanted to get. So if we come back here, you can also see we have our post inputs and patch and destroy. So let's also create methods for those. So let's for posts, we'll say async, and we'll call it create data. And we can simply set our response to be await, and here we'll use post. Here we use get, here we'll use post, since we're making a post request. And where do we want to post to? Well, if we look at if we run Rails routes and we look at our routes, we can see that there's our create action. It goes to articles. So for our post, the create action we wanted to go to articles. Since we're using a post request, we can actually just do this, or we can hard code it, but we'll just do it this way. So we'll say window.location.href, and then for this request we want to specify the body, and we want to submit some JSON. So we want to set the title, and we can say this is from the console, and next we want to set the content. You can say some random information. We could also enter some user input. We could do that, but we'll just do it this way for demonstration purposes. So if our response is okay, you could simply console.log successful post, right? So if we head back here, we could simply copy this, and we can change this, say create random data, and our method, we call this create data. So we can change this, create data. So then we come back here, refresh the page, and we click on create random data. We can see, if we look at our logs here, it was a successful insert with the title "This is from the console," and the content was some random information. If we refresh it, you can see this our information here that we created from our JavaScript file was successfully posted. So the next action that we want to take is we would like to update the information that we have created. So similarly to create, and we'll use async, and let's say update data. And with that, we could say so to update the data, we need to specify the ID of what we want to update. So what we can do, a simple workaround, we could create a button here, and since we're saying update data, we could say update data here, and we can specify the ID, and as we're specifying the ID, and pass in some Ruby code here. So we could pass article.id. So if we save it and we come back here and we click on inspect, and rather we did not close this. So if we refresh it, you can see we have, this has an ID of 1. This has an ID of 2. So now that we have that, we can come back here and we could pass a variable here, e, and this e is the event. So if we wanted to, we could say var id is equal to e.target.id. So we could say console.log id, right? Just to be sure that we're getting everything correct. So this is update data, and we can save it. So if we refresh and we click on update the random data, you can see it prints out the ID. So we head back here, and then we don't need this anymore. You could say const response equals to awaits.patch, and we could say window.href, or rather window.location.href, and href, and we can specify ID here. So what we want to do next is we want to state the body that we want to pass, and of course it will be in form of JSON. And you can just say title. Let's just change it to title has been changed. So if we refresh this and we click up update random data, so if we actually wrap this in a string, right, and then we can say if response dot okay, just console.log response.body. So you can click on update random data, and it's the successful. Let's refresh it, and you can see there was a successful change here to what we wanted to. We do the same thing for the second one. So what we want to do next, we want to be able to delete our records, our articles. So what we can do is very similar to update. So we can use async destroy data, and of course we want the event, and you can say void.id equals to e.target.id. There's a lot of repetition here, no problem. We can say constant response equals to await, and we want to use the destroy action. And if we look at our route once more again, you can see the destroy or the delete goes to articles / the ID. So we could use / articles and pass our ID. And if we have a response, we could simply use successful delete, right? And then you can come back here, and what did we call it? Destroy data. And say destroy data. Destroy data. So once you come back here, scroll to the bottom, refresh here, we have destroy data here. So if we click on it, you can see our data was successfully deleted. If we refresh it, you can see it gives us a message. We can do it right again. And there we go. So that is our basic introduction to Request.js.